we are, and we've started. You actually have to talk into the mic.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
hi.
yeah. Hi.
Hi.
So people know who you are. I know who you are because I grew up with you. But tell people who you are.
Okay, I am Jennifer. I am Jamie's older sister. And
Yes.
we grew up together in the same room, in the same apartment, in the same room. I'm going to repeat that a couple times because that's very elemental in our development and our relationship.
So I there's a couple.
I used to make little books.
Yeah.
And I used to
They would
make
be probably qualified as zines nowadays.
I guess so. It was basically the childhood me trying to imitate what a book looked like.
Yeah,
So I would
exactly.
take paper, I'd fold it in half, and it would have chapters and illustrations and whatever. And I guess at the time when I was doing this, I had just started reading serieses. That's the dog.
That's
just
the dog.
ignore the dog.
It's
she
fine.
wants to talk.
You can
to.
hear it over the mics, but don't worry. If we talk, you'll be able to hear it off the. Yeah, it's totally fine.
Okay. So
I prepared for this.
So
it's fine.
I shouldn't gag the dog.
No, you shouldn't gag the dog. It'll be fine.
So I guess I was reading series at the time, Babysitter's Club or Sweet Valley something, and I thought, I'm going to make series. That's what you do. Books are in a series. So the first one, which was one of the first books I ever made, actually, was My Pesky Brother, and it was about Jamie, who must have been 2 or so at the time. You were very little.
I was very
because
small.
Because part of My Pesky Brother was it had 2 sections. The first one was the things that suck about my brother, and the second half was the things I love about my brother.
Right.
And one of the things that I didn't like was that you would get in all of my stuff.
Yeah, of course.
So you were young enough to get in my stuff. And then the second half was all the stuff I love about you. And then there was My Pesky Brother Returns.
Yes.
Which was the sequel
of course.
to My Pesky Brother.
Of course.
Which wasn't nearly as good as the first one, like most sequels.
As it will happen.
So then I kind of got away from writing for a while, and then I started to get back to it, but I just couldn't do the poetry thing.
Right.
As a fellow writer, that if you don't write all the time, you sit down, you start to write, and you suck.
Yeah.
And the thing that comes out on the paper is the worst thing ever, and that's kind of what happened with me with poetry.
Right.
Is I started to try to get back to it, and everything I wrote was horrible. And so then I didn't write for quite some time. And then about, I want to say 2.5 years ago.
Something like that,
I said, all right, I have to get back to writing. And the only thing that's going to make me do this is if I write something that maybe someone else is reading on a regular basis. So I started a blog.
Yes.
And that is what got me back to writing. I created it as Mama, M-A-M-A, but it is basically martial arts mommy archives, I think.
Something like
that.
Yeah.
And it alternates between writing about martial arts, particularly my experiences as a woman in the martial arts.
Right.
And about
We're going to come
motherhood.
back to that, by the way.
And
both
about raising my daughter and stuff like that. And then...
So at some point in college, because this is kind of where the track that I am on now, that I've been on for the past couple of years, sort of starts, you did slam for a brief.
I did.
A very brief period in college.
I was terrible at it.
But you were where? You were at...
I was at, I guess it was Urbana.
Yeah, and it was Bowery...
It was at Bowery Poetry Club.
Bowery Poetry, the now defunct Bowery Poetry Club.
Well, actually, when I first
was it
started...
CB's? Was it across the
street?
street?
We were at CB's, yeah. And then we moved to Bowery Poetry Club, and then toward the end of the time when they moved to Bowery Poetry Club, I stopped doing slam. But when I first started it, they were at CBG. I think they were at CBGB's.
Yeah, I think so. I could double check this because I now know all. But then
I'm pretty sure that's where they were.
You for a brief period knew all of the people who are kind of. I mean, it's a subculture, so it doesn't matter to anyone outside of, except for maybe like one poem, which is the poem we all know, which is Taylor Molly's poem.
Yes.
But you knew all those people when they were like Kristen and
Kristen
Bosea.
was the one who made me slam.
Of course, because that's what Kristen did.
Because I showed up one night and I loved writing, but I'm not a performer. I've never been a performer. And so I signed up for just the open, like the open mic. They don't call it an open mic in poetry. What do you call it?
No, it was the open mic.
I guess you call it. Yeah,
it was the open mic.
I just signed up to read my little poem.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Oh, we need more women. We want girls. We need girls on stage. You have to totally do the slam."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, I don't memorize my stuff." And she's like, "You don't have to. You can read it. It's fine."
Yeah.
So she basically bullied me up onto stage and made me slam.
That's what Kristen has been doing for years.
Did it for a couple months after that, and then was like terrified every time.
Yeah, and you were actually, because of how far back this was, you were slamming with people who now no longer slam and are the people who are coming up now, coming out of like the college slams. I'm giving a context for people who are like not listening to this and are younger. There are people coming out of, there weren't even really college slams, I don't think.
No, I mean, when I was there, Bosia was there, and Taylor was still actively, he wasn't like running it. He was still actively competing.
Steve Coleman,
and
I
Kristen
think.
was there. Steve Coleman was there. Like Patricia Smith was like one of the regular features at the time.
Yeah.
Like a lot of those people, I don't know if any of those people are still.
They're not actively
around.
They're still around, but they've become the icons.
Right.
Oh, they're the people who everybody kind of fawns over. Whereas it's like when you were there, they was like they were still doing what a lot of the people I know were doing then.
Yeah. Except don't mind.
Yeah.
Well, I found there's two things that happen. Number one, you're absolutely right. If you become a teacher, then a lot of your focus and your energy goes toward becoming a better teacher if you care at all about being a good teacher.
Yeah.
Which I do very much.
Yeah.
And in fact, teaching kind of becomes its own art.
Yes.
So now it's, all right, I'm teaching, and I teach mostly children. In fact, I teach almost exclusively children.
Yeah.
My husband teaches the adult classes. And I, on a day-to-day basis, on a class-to-class basis, am trying to improve on something that didn't go so well in the last class. And that becomes its own study all on its own.
And that's
a huge thing.
lifetime
I'm sure
learning
exactly.
experience. Yeah.
It totally is. But then what also happens with the actual training is you kind of find new ways to go with it. So well, I found there's two things that happen. Number one, you're absolutely right. If you become a teacher, then a lot of your focus and your energy goes toward becoming a better teacher if you care at all about being a good teacher.
Yeah.
Which I do very much.
Yeah.
And in fact, teaching kind of becomes its own art.
Yes.
So now it's, all right, I'm teaching, and I teach mostly children. In fact, I teach almost exclusively children.
Yeah.
My husband teaches the adult classes. And I, on a day-to-day basis, on a class-to-class basis, am trying to improve on something that didn't go so well in the last class. And that becomes its own study all on its own.
And that's
a huge thing.
lifetime
I'm sure
learning
exactly.
experience. Yeah.
It totally is. But then what also happens with the actual training is you kind of find new ways to go with it. So it's different for everyone, but for some people it's becomes a more meditative practice.
Yeah.
For some people it becomes more about perfecting every technique. So now I'm going to learn to throw the perfect punch.
Yeah.
And that's going to take the next 10 years. If you don't find that, then you're done, because what are you going to just take class every day? No, you're going to get bored, and it's totally
and then it becomes
understandable.
habitual.
When you run a karate school, the kids are what make the money, and then you teach adults out of pleasure.
Yeah.
And not that the adult program doesn't make money. We have a lot of adults, and it's great, but you can't run a dojo without a kids program.
Yeah.
The kids are where, and I love teaching the kids. I don't want to make it sound like, they're just the money-making venture.
Well,
but you cannot run a dojo without having a successful
but
kids
I also
program.
think, being an instructor, in particular a woman in martial arts, addressing women in martial arts, women as teachers in martial arts, and if you want women in MMA and whatever you have to, because I know you've written a couple things about it.
I think I've been fortunate, first of all. Karate tends to be a very open to women. I mean, there are karate schools out there that are very male oriented.
Yeah.
But in my experience, I just have been fortunate to train in karate schools that were very open and accepting of women. There was not a lot of like uncomfortability. There wasn't a lot of men behaving like jerks. There wasn't a lot of that. I've also been extremely fortunate in jiu-jitsu because you get that a lot in jiu-jitsu schools.
Yeah.
And I happen to have found a jiu-jitsu school that is very welcoming to women,
Right.
that has a lot of women. And a lot of women for a jiu-jitsu school is 2 in every class.
Yeah.
That's generally considered a lot of women in every jiu-jitsu. And I've been very fortunate as a student, as a female student. You know, there have been experiences I've had. You know, it wasn't perfect. There have been guys who were less than appropriate in class. You know, there have been comments made. There have been gestures. But for the most part, it's been a very respectful place. And I know that is not always the case.
Right.
And I know that there are schools where women are just either they are treated as kind of fodder for the men to leer at when they're training, or they're kind of, you know, the new students join and they date the men and then they break up and then they quit and like that happens. And of course, this was a topic for a whole other podcast, but there are schools where rape happens. There are schools where the teacher is inappropriate with his students. There are all kinds of stuff.
But here's honestly the unfortunate part about that is that I feel like we're talking about that in the context of martial arts schools, but that's just it's just symptomatic of what happens in the culture at large.
Well, absolutely. But then when you put, you know, so in the culture, there's
a power dynamic.
There's men and there's women, but in a lot of places, they're at least, like if you go to the workplace and you work in an office, the men and women, there might be more men than women in your office, and the men might treat the women weird sometimes, but the martial arts world is a male-dominated place. It just is. I mean, there's more. I, as a female martial artist, can say, oh, no, it's totally for women, and I think it is, but there's just more men there. That's
there's
just
also,
a fact.
I mean,
and there's more men who want to, you know, if you interview 10 women and you interview 10 men and you ask them, do you want to fight?
Yeah.
Do you want to, like, you know, or particularly with jiu-jitsu, hey, do you want to roll around on a mat with some other people sitting on you and choking you?
Yeah.
Maybe half the men are going to be like, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
And one of the women. I mean, it's not.
Is that you are, for all intents and purposes, the co-head instructor.
Sometimes
of the
they
school.
think I'm the receptionist. Every so often I do get that. Like
someone
comes every so often. It happens rarely. It's a credit to New York that it happens rarely.
But that's people
just walking in. Yeah,
that's
so often
though.
people walk in and if I'm not in my gi, they assume that I'm just the person who works there.
Yeah. But that's just people who are walking in.
Yeah, but I actually get surprisingly few. Oh, you're the teacher? When like people like it helps that I teach kids. I don't know if there'd be a difference. I have taught adults and I've been received really well. If I were the head instructor of the adult program, I don't know. It's an interesting question to see. Like people kind of accept, you know, a lot of kids, their teacher at school is a woman.
Yeah.
So the idea of being a woman karate teacher, okay, that's a little weird.
Yeah.
But it's not totally weird, especially because I teach 3-year-olds.
Yeah.
And I mean, I teach 5-year-olds, I teach 7-year-olds, but it's not totally crazy. But I'd be curious to see if I'm the head instructor of the adult program.
But
that might be a little
The reason why
different.
I bring that up is I feel like as a female student, an adult student coming into the school, the fact that you are the co-head instructor, it's like, and not just, I mean, I'm saying it for women. I feel like that's a positive thing for them coming in, and it's actually a plus as far as your school is concerned. On a more general, not just dealing with women, the fact that it seems once you're in the school, once you know the situation, that it's like, it's Matt and you and you're married, it's like, oh, we're entering a family.
Right. Yeah, well, I'm a huge fan of women in MMA in general.
Okay.
I think it's great. I wish Ronda Rousey would stop talking so much, but as a fighter, I think she's fantastic.
That's kind of why I asked you that question.
I mean, I think I think she's amazing. I think she's done amazing things for women in the sport
right.
of MMA. I just wish she would shut up sometimes.
She says some things that are not so great.
I think I'm hopeful. They're not, the UFC and Dana White and that whole organization, they're ready to accept women in their organization.
But they're used to marketing the men.
Exactly. They're not quite ready to market them as fully as athletes yet.
Yeah.
So they still have to do the tight dresses. And
Yeah,
they
of
have
course.
to do stupid comments like, not just pretty faces, but we'll smash your face in.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. And, I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised. And I'm hoping. Always going to be men who, first of all, there's always going to be men who do not like seeing women fight,
right.
who are not comfortable with a woman punching another woman in the face.
Right.
And then there's always going to be the men who are like, I'd like to Jiu-Jitsu that. And like, it's not, we're not going to change the entire male culture.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
And thankfully, I think there's a lot of, I would even go as far as to say the majority of men out there are not total douchebags, but there's always going to be that.